All right, everyone. So in this lecture video, what I would like to do is just go over some things to remember about identifying connective tissues. So connective tissues can be difficult to see, but there are some things that you can look for to help you identify not only that it is connective tissue, but what kind of connective tissue it is. Okay, so let's just review a little bit about connective tissues in general. So remember, with connective tissue, our connective tissue is going to be generally deeper and specifically deep to epithelium. Right. Its main function here is going to be in support, that it provides kind of that scaffolding in which other cells can bind to. So we've got structure here. Transport, so again, through our connective tissues where we actually have a lot of interstitial movement of materials. So those are all going to go through our those are going to go travel through that membrane area or the area between the membranes of cells, specifically through the matrix in our connective tissues. It's there for storage of energy, specifically adipose. So we use that not only to store energy, but it's also, and for humans, example, we use it as a means of insulation to help limit heat loss. And then lastly is defense. So again, a structural and immune barrier. So not only are these fibers that are connected together serving sort of like a net, catching whatever is coming through, it's also where we're going to have different immune cells that are going to allow us kind of that first signal for your immune system to respond to any kind of weird stuff trying to get into your system. So as we move through our different types of connective tissue, I just want to remind you of the different kinds. Okay, so I have a error here. So with our connective tissue proper, okay, this is what we're looking at, the majority of the tissues that we're going to be seeing in our lab, right? So loose connective tissue is going to be like what we're going to see for areolar, reticular, our adipose tissue. These are all going to be very loose in the sense that they're going to be very transparent, and they're going to be found generally either as a sheet, so you're looking at like an overview of it, sort of like a whole mount, or you're looking at a cross-section of it, or you're looking at it's going to be deeper to some kind of epithelium. The other type that we're going to be spending a lot of time with is looking at dense regular connective tissue. So this is like what we're going to be seeing in our tendons and ligaments. So these particular types are going to be much more structured. Again, regular here means that if something is regular, it's consistent, it's repeated. Okay, so you're going to see a pattern to it. That varies from dense irregular, right? So a dense irregular is going to be that you're going to be seeing less of a pattern, but you're going to be seeing kind of the similar structures in that you've got lots and lots of supporting tissues, lots of collagen, that kind of thing. Supporting connective tissues, sorry, that should be not indented. This is going to be what we're going to see with bone a little bit later, but now we're going to be seeing with cartilage. And I'll talk about the specific features of those in a little bit. And then lastly, fluid connective tissue. This is going to be blood and lymph. So we're not going to be looking at lymph because lymph is basically clear and hard to see, but we are going to be looking at blood, and I'll be pointing out some things about blood. Okay, so one of the biggest questions I've been getting is, what do I look for when I'm looking for connective tissues or looking at connective tissues? So these are the four things that we want to be looking for. The first thing that we want to be looking at is cell type. So with connective tissue, there's a lot more variation in the cell type other than just like you've got a layer of tissues like we saw with our epithelium that's got either a flat shape, a column shape, or something like that. With these guys, when we're looking at cell type, a lot of these cells are going to be round, or they're going to be kind of a weird kind of smush shape, or they're going to be really flat and elongated because of all the different fibers. Okay, so with our cell type, what we're really looking at is for a nucleus versus no nucleus, and that's going to tell us if it is fluid connective tissue or not. But also we're going to be looking at its location in between different parts of the matrix. Okay, so we're going to be comparing what's going to be going into the matrix. So we compare that, and we look for the number. Okay, so generally with our connective tissue, if you want to identify it as connective tissue, the number of cells will be lower than what we saw in epithelium. Okay, we're going to be seeing them more interspersed, so the nuclei are going to be much more distributed overall. Okay, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a little bit. All right, the other thing we look for is the matrix. So specifically, what is the mixture of the ground substance, again, that syrupy fluid that's in between the fibers of our tissue. Specifically, we want to look at fibers. So in our tissues with the fiber structure, we have three types. We have collagen, we have reticular, and we have elastic fibers. Oops, elastic. So with these fibers, okay, we're going to see them in kind of different structures. So the most common type we're going to see is collagen. So with the collagen fiber, okay, generally this is going to be really dense. It's going to be kind of a pinky color for the most part. Again, I don't like to use color as a reference, but generally collagen is kind of like pink to transparent. Reticular, these are a little bit harder to see unless you're looking specifically at reticular tissue. These are really the least common, and they don't stain well. So we're probably not going to see very much of those, but the one that you're going to see a lot of is elastic fibers, okay? So these are really branched and wavy, and they generally stain really dark. Okay, and you'll see a mixture of elastic fibers and collagen in most of the structure, and then just the relative ratio is what's going to define the tissue. If there's a lot more collagen, it's probably going to be a dense regular connective tissue, okay, or a dense irregular connective tissue. If it's got more elastic, generally it's going to be either a supporting connective tissue, like you're going to have elastic cartilage, or you're going to have it in this loose connective tissue, specifically looking at areolar. You're going to have quite a bit of elastic fiber there. All right, the next thing we look for is transparency, okay? So in general, connective tissue will be more transparent than the rest that we've seen, right? There's more space, so there's gonna be more light going through when you're looking at it on a slide. And with that greater transparency means that there's more space, right? That there's gonna be more fluid in the matrix, and that's gonna help inform what kind it is, okay? So if we're talking about the matrix, right, you're gonna see more transparency, so greater transparency, in your loose connective tissue than you will in your dense, regular, and irregular. The ones that are going to have the most, you're also going to have a high transparency in fluid. But really compared to our connective tissue proper and our supporting connective tissue, supporting connective tissue is going to be less transparent. Okay. Lastly, when we look at this, we're going to be looking for location. So the big question is it deep? Okay, are we looking at it, is it deep to an epithelium? So one of the best ways you can find a connective tissue is see if you can find an epithelium, right? See if you can find a layer of simple squamous epithelium or columnar epithelium, something like that, that you know what it looks like based on shape and structure, that it's near a lumen or it looks like it's near the surface of the cell or of the tissue, right? And then look south of that, right? Generally, that's where your epithelium is going to be. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of what you're seeing with your epithelium. Let's start talking about what these structures are actually going to look like. Okay, so what we have here is an example of a connective tissue proper. So this is specifically looking at a tissue, a diagrammatic view of a tissue that would be similar to what you're seeing with areolar tissue. Okay, so like with all of these tissues, the thing that we're looking for are cells. Oops. You're looking at fibers, right? And you're looking for transparency. So this particular type of tissue, if you look here at the zoomed in view, yes, it's very stylized, yes, it's very large, right? But you can see most of the different tissue types. So areolar tissue type is going to have a bunch of different cells, okay, a lot of different kinds of cells. The one that you're going to be seeing the most of is going to be a fibroblast. Okay, so here we have a fibroblast that's identified. So in ours, we're going to be seeing a majority of these. Okay. The other thing we're going to be seeing a lot of are these collagen fibers. Okay, so these guys right here that are really thick and dense. Okay, these are collagen. These reticular fibers we're probably not going to be able to see, but you will be able to see in some tissues these elastic fibers. Okay, so those are going to be much more branched. Right, and they're going to show up as a really dark color. So generally they look kind of like a dark purple, but they're going to be much darker than everything else that you're going to be seeing. So with our areolar connective tissue, if we wanted to identify it based on ground substance, right, our ground substance is really watery. It's really see-through, right? This tissue's main function is to just serve as a layer of protection. Okay, so let's start looking at actual slides, right, and compare them to the diagrammatic view, okay, and let's talk through what you're looking for as we're going through these different tissue types. So this loose connective tissue, okay, so again, similar to our areolar connective tissue. All right, when we're looking at these under the slides, you're going to see a lot of these little nuclei. Okay, these nuclei represent the fibroblast. Okay, but once I can identify the different tissue types, the thing I'm looking for here is I'm looking for the connective tissue fiber. Okay, what fiber am I seeing the most of? So looking here, right, there's lots of transparent space going on in these different areas, but I'm also seeing a lot of these really thick, kind of pinky, hard to see fibers. Okay, this is going to be collagen. So loose connective tissue will have an increased amount of collagen compared to the rest of the different types of fibers, but you will see the occasional elastic fiber. So remember, elastic fibers are, I cannot spell elastic. Elastic fibers are going to be fibers that are present in most of your connective tissue because you need to be able to move, right? It needs to be flexible and have some motility to it in order for it to function normally. Okay. Another cell you might see will be a macrophage in this areolar tissue, but I doubt you're going to find that. So macrophages are again a type of white blood cell. Okay. So again, with this particular type, right, I'm looking here and what I see overall with its structure, right, this is irregular, right? It's not like what we saw with our epithelia where it was forming like this neat structured row where I can look and see the specific type. All right, this is more sporadic, right? You've got essentially all of these fibers coming in around all of these nuclei, right? This is going to be what I'm going to denote as connective, right? This is kind of that random web-like structure is what connective tissue is going to be. Okay, let's look at adipose tissue. So the big thing with adipose tissue as we're identifying it is that it's almost totally transparent. And that's because during the structure, how they make the slide is they take a layer of this connective tissue, right? They fix it by putting the tissue on there and then they wash away all of the fat. So what you have left with are these big pockets where the fat was. Okay, and then in between that, you're going to have the cell membranes and that loose areolar tissue type that's kind of looking like reticular fibers and stuff like that. That's going to be in between. Okay, so this is where you're going to have the fibers and things like that. Okay, so with looking at adipose, the big thing you're looking for is you're looking for this space. So again, a lot of see-through. Okay, so what you're looking at here is not like the cell membrane, right? What you're seeing is where the cell used to be, right, relative to the connective tissue. So you do see a little bit of the membrane here, but again, it's mostly gone. Okay. All right, let's look at dense connective tissue, dense regular connective tissue. So we are looking at specifically a tendon, and what you're going to be seeing in our slides is ours are a little mixed up in that we have some sections that are cross sections and some that are actually functioning as like this longitudinal section that you're seeing here. So again, this is longitudinal. And I can tell it's longitudinal because all of the fibers are running kind of in this grained, let me get a different color. They're going in this kind of continued grain pattern, okay, that's going up and down, right? And we can follow through. The other thing that I'm seeing here when I look at the nuclei, so again, a longitudinal structure, if I look at the nuclei, the big thing about comparing this when looking at the nuclei are kind of smushed. And that is the technical term, smushed. In that they are elongated, they're running with the length of the fiber, but they're in between all of these different fibers. Okay, so when you see the nuclei shape, right, if it's elongated, that's a really good signal that you've got some kind of dense connective tissue. Okay, that it's being smushed, that there's so densely packed connective fibers in this substance, in this matrix, that the matrix is mostly fiber. And when looking at these, since it's mostly fiber, right, there's going to be little transparency. It's going to be very see-through. Okay. So I don't have a slide on here of dense irregular connective tissue, and you're not really going to be looking at, but we are going to be looking at a few examples of supporting connective tissue. Okay, so looking at supporting connective tissue, these are specifically looking at different kinds of cartilage, and we've got a few different kinds of cartilage that we're looking at, but the one that we're going to be focusing on is specifically hyaline cartilage and a little bit of fibrocartilage. So with the fibrocartilage, we're not, is something we'll look at a little bit later when we talk about bones, but when we're looking here at this hyaline cartilage, this is cartilage that will have like kind of in between joints is where you're going to have a lot of it. You have a slide that's looking at what's called the ligamentum nuchae. which is actually, if you feel on the back of your neck and you squeeze right there, that's the connective tissue that you're feeling, right? It's a really thick, dense, supporting cartilage that's help supporting what you're seeing, or help support what's going on with your neck. And that ligamentum has a bunch of other stuff going on, but you'll see that type. Okay, so when you're looking here, all right, since we're looking at this supporting connective tissue, the big thing here is that if we compare the number of cells and the shape of cells, they're going to be low in number, and they're going to be relatively round. Okay, compared to the other types that we're going to see, these are going to be relatively round. The other thing that you see here is that around the cell, there is this kind of thickening or darkening in color, and that's because essentially what we're seeing here is a pocket that the cell lives in. That pocket is known as a, oh, sorry, I got a message. So that pocket there is known as a lacunae. So a lacunae is just a pouch, a hole, right? Some area that the cell is sitting in. Okay, so lacunae is there for protection. But if we had to compare the structure and what we're seeing here with the matrix and this stuff, right? Our matrix is still really dense and full of fiber, but the ground substance in here is really thick. Right, and because it's so thick, it's giving kind of this like very smooth looking pattern. Right, cartilage under the scope looks very smooth. Right, you're not going to see a lot of fibers. You're not going to see a lot of that because of the mixture of this ground substance and the way it's structured. But you will see this very kind of smooth shear thing. So if you're seeing a bunch of little pockets of tissue, right, of these cells with interspersed with kind of like this very sheer, continuous, non-fibrous looking thing, that's your signal that it's cartilage. Okay. So again, those two things will tell you it's cartilage. This type of cartilage here, we don't have a slide that we're specifically looking at that has this. However, I like us looking at it because I think it does a really good job highlighting what you're seeing with our elastic fibers. Okay, so when you're looking at elastic cartilage, this is like what's in your ear. With the elastic cartilage, you're going to have still the lacunae with their specialized cells, which are chondrocytes. Again, that's what we call essentially, they're similar to fibroblasts, but in this case we call them chondrocytes because they're found in cartilage. That you're going to see these lacunae and these chondrocytes inside of any kind of cartilage. But you can see that here you've got these kind of networks of these purple fibers. So again, remember when I said if you're seeing these darker, thinner fibers, those are elastic fibers. So elastic fibers, again, are going to be there for stretch, right? If you like play with your ear, right, it's flexible, it goes back and forth, it's really motile, right? It kind of springs back, and that's because of that extra elastic fiber, okay? But this slide, I gave it to you just because I think it does a better job showing what those networks of elastic fibers will look like. Again, much darker in color, right, compared to the very pink collagen that you're seeing in this areas. Okay, so like here would be a lot of collagen. All right, the last two slides that we're looking at, right, are, again, other types of connective tissue. So this is an example of a fibrous cartilage. So this is like what you're going to be seeing between your vertebra, again, places where you need really dense, really thick, really strong cartilage. And again, the matrix here you're going to see is that the matrix is very, again, sheer, but you've got this continuation of fiber, okay? So this is something that we're not specifically looking at, but again, I wanted to highlight what you're going to be seeing with that structure of fiber. Okay, so this is a lot like what we see with our dense connective tissue, like what we see in tendons and ligaments, except the cell type is very different, right? You see here we have the much larger chondrocyte in a lacunae that's happening placed inside of this tissue. Okay. But the last one that I wanted to point out was our fluid connective tissue. So again, this is looking at blood. Okay, so with blood, there are specific cell types. So when I say erythrocyte, that's going to be your red blood cell. Okay, so with the red blood cell, remember its structure is a little bit like this, sort of like a weird donut, okay? Because the nucleus in here is gone. So that's how we identify this as a red blood cell, right? We look at the images that are over here, you see that the cell is round and there's this kind of clear spot in the middle. That's not a nucleus, right? That is where we're seeing the light going through this much thinner part of the cell, okay? The reason why it's like this is that it increases surface area. And by increasing the surface area, it allows for more diffusion of gases, specifically oxygen and carbon dioxide, to allow the cells to function. Okay, to do what they need to do, which is transporting materials. Okay, so looking at this, there's some other cells that you'll see sometimes. So in our slides, they're kind of all mushed up pretty bad, but you can see that there are a few that are much larger. Okay, and these actually have multiple kind of weird nuclei structures, but these are what we call leukocytes. A leukocyte is a white blood cell. Okay, so if you're looking at the relative ratio, right, it's about 1% of your blood is going to contain like any level of white blood cells if you're normal homeostatic function. You don't have a whole lot that are there compared to the amount of red blood cells that are present. Okay, so these white blood cells are much harder to see, but they're like usual. You're looking for a nucleus, you're looking for these darker stained areas inside of the cell, compared to everything else you're seeing outside, which is again much looser, right? Not there. So the thing with fluid connective tissue that separates it is that its matrix has it does have fiber, but it has low fiber and lots and a very high amount of kind of a fluid, specifically what we call plasma. Okay. All right, so again, just to reiterate the things that we're looking for when we're looking at connective tissues, right? We're looking at the cell type, we're looking at the matrix, we're looking at the overall transparency, and where it's located. So again, all of these, even though these are much more zoomed in, right, these are much deeper inside of the tissue, right? If we're looking at all of the other supportive things, right, they're going to be much, much deeper. Okay. So if you've got more specific questions about this, please let me know. I'm happy to try to answer as many as